After World War II, Mao Zedong led communist forces to victory over Jiang Zemishi's nationalists who fled to Taiwan. Then Mao began to reshape China's economy. First, he gave land to peasants, but then called for collectivization. Under this system, Mao moved people from their small villages and individual farms into communes of thousands of people on thousands of acres. Known as the Great Leap Forward, the program was intended to increase farm and industrial production. Instead, it produced low-quality, useless goods and less food. Bad weather also affected crops, and many people starved. To remove bourgeois tendencies from China, Mao began the Cultural Revolution. Skilled workers and managers were removed from factories and forced to work on farms or in labor camps. This resulted in a slowed economy and a threat of civil war. At first, the United States supported the nationalist government in Taiwan. The West was concerned that the Soviet Union and China would become allies, but border clashes led the Soviets to withdraw aid and advisors from China. U.S. leaders thought that by playing the China card or improving relations with the Chinese, they would further isolate the Soviets. In 1979, the United States established diplomatic relations in China. Korea was an independent nation until Japan invaded it in World War II. After the war, American and Soviet forces agreed to divide the Korean peninsula at the 38th parallel. In 1950, North Korean troops attacked South Korea. The United Nations forces stopped them along a line known as the Pusan Perimeter, then began advancing north. Mao sent troops to help the North Koreans. UN forces were pushed back south of the 38th parallel. In 1953, both sides signed an armistice to end the fighting, but troops remained on both sides of the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Over time, South Korea enjoyed an economic boom and a rise in living standards, while communist North Korea's economy declined. In the 1800s, the French ruled the area of southeast China called French Indochina. During World War II, Japan invaded that region, but faced resistance from guerrillas. After the war, the French tried to re-establish authority in Vietnam. However, forces led by communist leader Ho Chi Minh fought the colonialists. The French left Vietnam in 1954 after a Vietnamese victory at Dien Bien Phu. After that, Ho controlled the northern part of Vietnam while the United States supported the non-communist government in the south. Ho wanted to unite Vietnam. He provided aid to the National Liberation Front, or Viet Cong, a communist guerrilla organization in the South. American leaders saw Vietnam as an extension of the Cold War and developed the domino theory. This was the belief that if communists won in South Vietnam, then communism could spread to other governments in Southeast Asia. After a North Vietnamese attack on a U.S. Navy destroyer, Congress authorized the president to take military measures to prevent further communist aggression in Southeast Asia. Despite massive American support, the South Vietnamese failed to defeat the Viet Cong and their North Vietnamese allies. During the Tet Offensive, the North Vietnamese attacked cities all over the South. Even though the communists were not able to hold any cities, it marked a turning point in U.S. public opinion. Upset by civilian deaths from the U.S. bombing of North Vietnam, as well as growing American casualties, many Americans began to oppose the war. President Nixon came under increasing pressure to terminate the conflict. The Paris Peace Accord of 1973 established a ceasefire, and American troops began to withdraw. 2 years later, Communist North Vietnam conquered South Vietnam. Neighboring Cambodia and Laos also ended up with communist governments. In Cambodia, guerrillas called the Khmer Rouge came to power, led by the brutal dictator Pol Pot. Their policies led to a genocide that killed about 1/3 of the population. When Vietnam invaded Cambodia, the genocide ended. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge were forced to retreat. Communism did not spread any farther into Southeast Asia.